from Matthew's Gospel, continuing in that chapter 22, beginning with verse 34. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all of the law and the prophets." Thus ends the reading of the word. Moses was a Class B felon on the run from Pharaoh when God called out to him from the burning bush. On that day, Moses became the somewhat reluctant servant of God, serving only the purposes of God for over 100 years. I'm exhausted just saying it. No pensioner he. Moses never retired from full-time service. His higher motives focused his life. Moses was both called by God and chosen to be a servant of God. Through all of his days, his patience was tried and his stamina was tested, yet his higher motives would not allow him to turn away from his task or throw up his hands and say no. He clung to God's promise year after year after year, doing teaching and intervening on behalf of God and God's people. We might wonder how Moses felt when he stood atop Mount Nebo, looking at the promised land in the distance, realizing that he would never set foot on the very soil he had worked his entire life to attain. We might wonder how he felt about being laid to rest in an unmarked grave in Moab, the land of the Moabites, who were not kin or not even friends of the Hebrews. He followed the command of God. 2 weeks ago I tackled that very tough parable about the wedding banquet, also in chapter 22 of Matthew's Gospel. We talked about the importance of taking the king's invitation, in Moses' case, the burning bush, the king's invitation to the wedding seriously. The last verses of that text were very troublesome and ominous, and I probably read them really, really fast. But they are full of warning and images of the unprepared guests at the wedding banquet being tossed out of the banquet on their ear. Matthew wrote, "For many are called, but few are chosen." That many are called part of the verse is said to be the arrow that is pointed at the heart of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the elders, but we need to let that phrase speak to us too. We who count ourselves among the world's Christians today, everyone has been invited in this parable. The few are chosen part of the verse uses the Greek word ekletoi for chosen. One of my favorite words, as I said in the children's sermon, the word eclectic. I never knew its etymology really until today. The English word is the Greek word, eclectic, ekletoi. Its synonyms today are varied, wide-ranging, extensive, diverse, and assorted, but it is because of the election, the choosing, that whatever is described as eclectic, it is because of that they are assorted. Someone once said that my taste was eclectic. They were describing my house. There was nothing uniform about my surroundings. Rather, the things that adorn my home and my office, for that matter, if any of you have been in there, are things and entities I have chosen or that have somehow chosen me, like my cat Ramona. The banquet hall in the parable is full of people who were called, who were invited to the banquet, who accepted the invitation. Discussing those who were or were not worthy of the invitation is a waste of time, because in the end the invitation was issued to everyone, good or bad. What becomes important is the acceptance of that invitation, that decision to step over the threshold into the banquet hall that comes with its own set of expectations. For Christians, our baptism is our acceptance of the invitation, whether we were baptized as infants or adults. In other words, whether we remember it or not, we are called to interpret our baptism as our acceptance of the King's invitation to the wedding banquet, which for Matthew symbolizes the acceptance of the call to follow Jesus. You may never have thought of your baptism as a call, as your call to ministry, but that is exactly what it is, because it is the sacramental first step on the path to holy living. On that path, we are to be in ministry, adding colorful panels to the robe of righteousness we will ultimately wear into the heavenly banquet. The twofold commandment that was our gospel text for today is what we carry with us as we walk on that path. I know you're going to say, this is an eclectic sermon. Where's she going now?
Yeah.
There's a wonderful scene in the film A League of Their Own, where Tom Hanks as Jimmy Duggan, the woman's baseball coach, is tearing down Evelyn, the right fielder. He yells at her, telling her to use her head, proclaiming in front of everyone that she has lost the Peaches, the league. It's all her fault. She begins to whimper and cry. And Duggan says, "Are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying in baseball." Matthew's parable says, in Jimmy Duggan-esque tradition, that there is no thumb-sitting for Christians. There is no thumb-twiddling, bead bench-sitting, or standing on the sidelines in Christianity. Jesus called to Peter, Andrew, James, and John, Mary, and Martha, was not exclusive to them. He called many people to follow, but there were many who had other things to do first. This eclectic group gathered here in worship are called. Many of us don't understand or acknowledge that. We believe being called is only reserved for those in pastoral ministry. Not so. Do parents understand, I wonder, the responsibility they have taken on when they make a vow to, quote, nurture their children in Christ's holy church, teaching them and setting an example for them, that they may be guided to accept God's grace for themselves and to profess their faith openly and to lead a Christian life, unquote. You may find what I'm about to say difficult to swallow, but there is no such thing as a part-time Christian. There are those who proclaim that they have no need for the church. I don't need to go to church to be a good Christian. No, you don't need to go to church to be a good person. Saying anything else is incorrect. I don't need to go to church to be a good Christian. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Some folks think that staying out of the church is the best way to be a good Christian. You avoid the politics and the infighting and ticked off pastors. That may be true. But there is all that in the world beyond the church. It's just here that we work hard to sort out the differences between and among us in a manner that doesn't involve the use of weapons. It is here and together that we are working out our salvation. Here and together is where we figure out what it means to love God and neighbor. It is here and together that we figure out what kind of love, the love that God is talking about, the love that Jesus is talking about, what this love has to do with holy living. It is here. Here is where we learn to imitate God, to echo God's grace to all the world. The love Jesus describes isn't about affection. It's about commitment. What is emphasized at every wedding or commitment ceremony is not that the couple exude affection toward each other for all of the witnesses to see daily, but that they honor their commitment. Those who wed enter into a covenant, vowing before God to be loyal to one another, to be committed to one another for life, through thick and thin, no matter what. The twofold commandment lifted up by Jesus in Matthew's Gospel today, to love God and neighbor, does not command us to show affection to God or neighbor. Rather, we are to be committed to both, seriously loyal and true to both. God first and neighbor second. This is the higher motive of Christians. It is the higher motive Christians can only learn in the laboratory we call the church, the community of faith. Some folks have believed that they have no difficulty with the first commandment, to love God. That is, until commitment to do that is challenged by another authority. The second one, in which Jesus says we are to be as committed to one another as we are to God, being loyal and true, whether our neighbor, he or she, is friend or enemy. That's tough. It's easier just to steer clear of them. Remembering that we are not obliged by the commandment to feel all gushy and affectionate toward everybody, but because we take our own needs seriously, so too we must take the needs of our neighbors seriously. Jesus was driven in his ministry to make clear that God is not wishy-washy about humankind. God promised and God delivered. Neither are we to be wishy-washy about God. God spoke to his children through the servant Moses and continued to speak to us through the prophets. God came closer than ever to us in the person of Jesus, calling for our commitment and undivided, unswerving attention and loyalty. And yet our loyalty and commitment to God is challenged every day. Our commitment to God and neighbor is challenged every day. It is so difficult to live the commitment, and none of us will be perfect at it. This is the tough part of this. And I hesitated whether I was going to share this with you. Last year, on November the 10th, I alienated someone permanently from this congregation. When I saw him arrive, I could have changed what I was going to preach, certain that what I was going to say, he would take personally. He was trying to return after a long time away. But I didn't change what I preached. He was angry and insulted. He did take it personally. believing that I failed to give him the honor he was due. I failed to honor his service to his country, and in turn he believed to God and neighbor. Dear ones, we live in the world, and the world demands much of us. The world is tangible. What it expects from us is tangible. In a very real sense, the world is more our master than God. Mull this over. I'm going to give you homework today. Have you ever wondered what would happen to your reputation if you went to an Amway meeting? Well, I could put a period there. If you went to an Amway meeting or a meeting at City Hall and did not put your hand over your heart and pledge allegiance to the flag. You know you would be asked why you failed to show respect to the flag, and you would be shunned. The invocation asking God's presence and blessing at the city council meetings always follows the pledge of national allegiance, clearly underlining the authority of the world. It was bound to happen. I will plant this question for you to think on and ponder. You might do some research on your own. We don't really have an idea what the kingdom of God means in the world today because we don't really have any point of reference. There are no monarchs that aren't token monarchs who reign supreme in the world today. Not those with clout or fear-engendering power like the Roman emperor or Pharaoh. But the people of Moses' time and Jesus' time knew very well the kind of power those rulers wielded. I will tell you this moment. Our God is not a token monarch. Our God is the creator of the universe. Our God has called us to commitment. Our God has called us to echo God's grace in every corner of the world. We must feel smaller, much, much